I built my first business at 19 with nothing but a food truck, a recipe for pulled pork sandwiches my grandmother taught me, and a dream that felt bigger than the cramped apartment I shared with my newborn son in downtown Portland. Back then, Marcus was everything to me. I'd wake up at 4 in the morning to prep the brisket, strap him to my chest in one of those baby carriers, and head out to the corner of 5th and Morrison, where the early morning construction workers lined up for breakfast. He'd sleep against my heartbeat while I served coffee and breakfast burritos, his tiny fingers curled around the fabric of my apron. Those were hard years, the kind that carve lines into your face and calluses onto your hands, but they were ours. Every dollar I made went into 2 places: diapers and a savings account I named Marcus's future. I told myself that one day he'd go to college, that he'd never know the fear of an empty refrigerator or the shame of wearing secondhand clothes to school. I promised him that in whispers while he slept, my lips pressed against his soft baby hair that smelled like Johnson's shampoo and hope. By the time Marcus turned 10, I'd sold that food truck and opened my first restaurant, a small place I called Ember and Oak on the east side of town. The name came to me one night while I was reading him a bedtime story about a phoenix rising from ashes. It felt right. I'd risen from my own ashes, hadn't I? A teenage pregnancy, parents who'd turned their backs on me, a high school diploma I had to finish online while working 2 jobs. Ember and Oak became my identity. I personally selected every piece of reclaimed wood for the tables, interviewed every server, perfected every item on the menu until it sang. The restaurant became known for its slow-cooked meats, its warm atmosphere, and the woman who owned it who remembered every regular customer's name and favorite dish. Marcus would do his homework at table 7 in the corner, the one with the wobbly leg I never quite fixed, while I managed the dinner rush. He grew up in that restaurant, celebrated every birthday there, brought his first girlfriend there for milkshakes and fries. I thought I was building something for both of us, a legacy we'd share someday when he was old enough to take over. The years moved fast after that. I opened 2 more locations, then a catering company called Hearthstone Events that specialized in weddings and corporate functions. By the time Marcus graduated from Riverside High School, I owned 4 successful businesses across the Pacific Northwest and had invested in commercial real estate that generated steady passive income. I wasn't wealthy by billionaire standards, but I was comfortable. More importantly, I was independent. I'd never remarried after Marcus's father disappeared before his first birthday. Never wanted to. My son was my purpose, my motivation, the reason I pushed through exhaustion and doubt, and the 100 small failures that come with entrepreneurship. When he got accepted to Westmont University with a full academic scholarship, I cried for 3 days straight. Not because he needed my money for tuition, but because he'd succeeded on his own merit. I'd raised a smart, capable young man. Or so I thought. Marcus met Jennifer during his junior year at Westmont. She was studying nonprofit management, volunteering at homeless shelters, organizing campus food drives. When he brought her home for Thanksgiving that year, I fell in love with her immediately. She helped me in the kitchen without being asked, laughed at my terrible jokes, and had this gentle way of speaking that made you feel heard. She came from a modest background too, her father a teacher and her mother a nurse, and she didn't seem impressed by money or status. She was impressed by kindness, by integrity, by the small things that actually matter. Over Christmas break, she and I stayed up late one night talking after Marcus had gone to bed. She told me about her dream to start a foundation for single mothers, to help them access childcare and job training. I told her about the food truck, about those early mornings with Marcus strapped to my chest. We both cried a little, and I remember thinking that I'd gained a daughter, not just a future daughter-in-law. The engagement happened last spring. Marcus proposed to Jennifer at the original Ember and Oak location, at table 7 with the wobbly leg, which I'd kept exactly as it was all these years. He'd coordinated with my staff to close the restaurant early, filled it with candles and roses, and asked me to be there to witness it. I watched from the kitchen doorway as he got down on one knee, as she said yes through happy tears, as they kissed and held each other. My heart felt so full it might burst. This was everything I'd worked for, everything I'd dreamed about during those exhausted early mornings 25 years ago. My son was happy, successful, in love with a wonderful woman. I'd done it. I'd raised him right. I'd given him the foundation to build his own beautiful life. The wedding planning started immediately. Jennifer wanted something intimate and meaningful, maybe 50 guests at a vineyard in the Willamette Valley. Marcus seemed happy to let her take the lead on most decisions, but he had opinions about the catering naturally. He wanted me to handle it personally, said no one could create the kind of warm, memorable dining experience I could. I was honored. I started planning a menu that would blend my signature dishes with Jennifer's favorites. working late into the night testing recipes and combinations. I wanted everything perfect for them. I paid for Jennifer's dress without telling Marcus, slipped the boutique owner my credit card when Jennifer fell in love with a vintage lace gown that was slightly out of her budget. I covered the venue deposit, the photographer, the florist. I did it quietly, not wanting recognition or gratitude, just wanting to give them the wedding they deserved. 3 weeks ago, I stopped by Marcus's apartment unannounced. I'd made a double batch of my white chicken chili, his favorite since childhood, and wanted to drop some off. He'd mentioned being stressed about work, about wedding planning, about life in general. I thought a home-cooked meal might help. I had a key to his place, had always had one for emergencies, so I let myself in quietly, not wanting to startle them if they were napping or watching a movie. I heard voices coming from the kitchen, Marcus and Jennifer talking. I almost called out to announce myself, but something in Marcus's tone stopped me. He sounded frustrated, sharp in a way I rarely heard. I should have made my presence known right then. I should have cleared my throat, knocked on the doorframe, anything. But I froze there in the entryway, the container of chili growing heavy in my hands, and I listened. I listened to my son, the boy I'd carried and nursed and raised and sacrificed everything for, say words that would shatter my entire world. He said, "I love my mom, I do, but she's becoming a burden. She's so involved in every detail of the wedding, acting like it's her event instead of ours. Always hovering, always offering to pay for things, always checking in." Jennifer's voice came next, softer, kinder. She said, "She just wants to help, Marcus. She loves you so much." And he laughed, this bitter sound I'd never heard from him before. He said, "I know she does, but it's suffocating. I can't wait until after the wedding when we can establish some boundaries. Maybe move to Seattle, get some distance. I need space from her constant need to be needed." The container of chili slipped from my hands and hit the entryway floor with a dull thud. The lid popped off, white chicken chili spreading across the hardwood in a slow, creeping pool. I stared at it, unable to move, unable to breathe, unable to process what I'd just heard. Burden. Suffocating. Need to establish boundaries. Need distance from her. The words repeated in my head like a song I couldn't turn off. Footsteps rushed toward me. Marcus appeared in the doorway, his face going pale when he saw me standing there. "Mom," he said, and I could see him calculating how much I'd heard, how much damage had been done. I found my voice somewhere deep in my chest, somewhere below the breaking, and said, "I brought you chili." Then I turned and walked out, leaving the mess on his floor, leaving my key on the entryway table, leaving pieces of my heart scattered between the kitchen and the door. I drove home in complete silence. No radio, no thoughts, just the sound of my own breathing and the occasional passing car. I pulled into my driveway, a beautiful craftsman-style house in the Pearl District that I'd bought 5 years ago, and sat in my car for an hour, maybe 2 hours. Time felt strange and elastic. My phone buzzed with calls and texts from Marcus, but I couldn't look at them. I couldn't see his name on the screen without hearing his words again. Burden. The word lodged itself in my throat like a piece of meat I couldn't swallow. I'd been called many things in my 45 years. Stubborn, driven, too independent, too proud, but never a burden. I'd prided myself on being the opposite, on being strong enough to carry others, on never needing anyone to carry me. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay in my bed staring at the ceiling, replaying every interaction I'd had with Marcus over the past few months. Every offer to help with the wedding, every check-in phone call, every suggestion about catering or venues or music. Had I been overbearing? Had I crossed lines I didn't even know existed? I'd thought I was being a good mother, an involved mother, the kind of mother who showed up and supported and loved without conditions. But maybe he was right. Maybe I'd been so focused on giving him everything I never had that I'd smothered him in the process. The thought made me nauseous. I got up at 3 in the morning and made coffee, stood at my kitchen window watching the city lights blur through tears I hadn't realized I was crying. Marcus showed up at my house the next afternoon. I'd ignored all his calls, all his texts that ranged from, "I'm sorry you heard that too," "We need to talk too," "Please, Mom, let me explain." I finally answered the door because he wouldn't leave, just kept ringing the bell and knocking. He looked terrible, his eyes red-rimmed and his hair uncombed. He started talking immediately. This rushed explanation about stress and pressure and saying things he didn't mean. He told me I'd taken it out of context, that he loved me, that I was the most important person in his life. He hugged me, and I let him, feeling his familiar weight against me, smelling his cologne mixed with the laundry detergent I'd taught him to use. But something had shifted. Some fundamental trust had cracked, and I couldn't unhear what I'd heard. I told him I forgave him, because that's what mothers do, and sent him home. Then I sat down at my kitchen table and cried until I had nothing left. The following week, I went through the motions. I showed up at my restaurants, smiled at customers, approved menus, paid invoices, but I felt hollowed out, like someone had scooped out everything essential and left only the shell. Jennifer called me several times, her voice full of apology and concern. She swore Marcus hadn't meant it the way it sounded, that he was just overwhelmed with work and wedding planning. She said she'd never thought of me as anything but wonderful, that she was grateful for everything I'd done. Her kindness almost made it worse. I wanted to believe her, wanted to believe this was all a misunderstanding, but I kept hearing that laugh in Marcus's voice when he'd talked about needing distance from me. That laugh told me everything I needed to know about how he really felt. 2 weeks after the chili incident, I found myself sitting in the offices of Cascade Legal Group on a rainy Thursday afternoon. I'd made the appointment 3 days prior, telling my assistant I had a personal matter to handle. Patricia Montgomery, the attorney I'd worked with on my business contracts over the years, sat across from me in her corner office overlooking the Willamette River. She'd poured us both coffee from her French press and waited patiently while I gathered my thoughts. "Patricia," I finally said, "I need to make some changes to my estate planning." She pulled out a legal pad and pen, nodding professionally. I took a breath that felt like swallowing glass and continued. "I want to transfer everything out of my name. Everything. The restaurants, the real estate holdings, the investment accounts, the retirement funds, all of it." I watched her eyebrows rise slightly, the only indication of surprise she allowed herself. She asked the question I knew was coming. "Who are you transferring it to?" My answer came out steady and clear. "Jennifer Hartwell, my future daughter-in-law. Everything goes to her, nothing to Marcus." Patricia set down her pen and looked at me for a long moment. She asked if I was sure, if something had happened, if I wanted to talk about it before making such a significant decision. I told her I'd never been more certain of anything in my life. I explained that I wanted Jennifer to have security, to have the means to start her foundation for single mothers, to have a safety net that came with no strings attached. Patricia asked about Marcus, about what he would inherit. I said he'd inherit exactly what he'd already decided I was to him. Nothing. I could see Patricia calculating whether to argue with me, whether to suggest alternatives or compromises. But something in my face must have told her this wasn't a discussion. This was a decision. She picked up her pen again and started taking notes. If you enjoyed this story of strength and boundaries, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and hit that notification bell so you never miss an empowering story. Drop a comment below saying something like a powerful story about knowing your worth. Your support means everything. Over the next several days, Patricia and I met 3 more times to finalize the paperwork. The process was more complex than I'd anticipated because of how my businesses were structured, how many assets were involved, how many legal entities needed to be addressed. But Patricia was thorough and efficient. She drew up new corporate structures, transferred property deeds, redesignated beneficiaries on every account. She created an ironclad trust with Jennifer as the sole beneficiary, with provisions that would make it nearly impossible for Marcus to contest. The whole time I signed documents, initialed pages, and provided authorization codes, I felt like I was watching myself from outside my body. Was I really doing this? Was I really cutting my only child out of my will, out of my legacy, out of everything I'd built? The answer kept coming back the same. Yes, because he'd already cut me out of his life. He just didn't know it yet. Marcus and I continued our regular routine on the surface. Sunday dinners at my house, occasional lunches at Ember and Oak, wedding planning discussions where I smiled and nodded and offered opinions when asked. But I'd pulled back in ways he didn't seem to notice. I stopped offering to pay for things. I stopped calling just to check in. I stopped being the mother who hovered and needed to be needed. If he noticed the shift, he didn't mention it. Maybe he was relieved. Maybe this was exactly the distance he'd wanted all along. Jennifer seemed to notice, though. She asked me once if everything was okay, if I was feeling well, her eyes full of genuine concern. I assured her I was fine, just tired from work, and changed the subject. The final documents were signed and notarized on a Tuesday morning in early October. Patricia placed everything in a leather portfolio and handed it to me across her desk. She said, "This is now legally binding and will take effect immediately. Everything you've worked for, everything you've built, now belongs to Jennifer Hartwell upon your instruction. I can include a letter of explanation if you'd like. Something your son could read to understand your reasoning. I thought about that for a moment. Did I want Marcus to know why? Did I want him to understand what his words had cost him? I shook my head. He'll figure it out, I said. Patricia nodded, stood up, and shook my hand. She said, "You're one of the strongest women I've ever met. I hope your son realizes what he's lost before it's too late." I thanked her and left her office, the portfolio tucked under my arm, feeling lighter than I had in weeks. The decision was made. The papers were signed. Now I just had to deliver them, and I knew exactly when and how I would do it. The engagement party was scheduled for the third Saturday in October at Riverbend Vineyard, a sprawling estate about 40 minutes outside Portland, where rows of grapevines stretched toward the Cascade Mountains. Jennifer's parents had insisted on hosting it despite my offers to pay, and I'd graciously accepted their generosity while secretly relieved I wouldn't have to pretend enthusiasm while writing another check. The invitation had arrived in my mailbox 3 weeks prior. Elegant cream cardstock with forest green lettering that read, "Join us in celebrating the engagement of Marcus Chen and Jennifer Hartwell." Seeing their names together still made my chest tight, but not with the joy I'd felt before. Now it was something else, something darker and more complicated that I didn't have words for yet. I RSVP'd yes with a handwritten note about how excited I was, sealed it in the return envelope, and placed it in my outgoing mail. Then I went inside and called Patricia Montgomery to confirm our final preparations. The days leading up to the party moved in this strange slow motion where everything felt both urgent and meaningless. I went to work, managed my staff, approved the new fall menu at Ember and Oak featuring butternut squash ravioli and braised short ribs. I met with my accountant to review third-quarter numbers for Hearthstone events. I went to my Pilates class at Core Balance Studio on Wednesday mornings. I watered my plants, paid my bills, returned phone calls. On the surface, my life looked exactly as it always had. But underneath, I was someone else entirely. I'd become the kind of woman who could smile at her son over coffee while knowing she'd signed away his entire inheritance. I'd become the kind of woman who could discuss wedding flowers while planning the most devastating surprise of his life. I'd become my own mother, the woman who'd cut me off without a second thought when I got pregnant at 17. And the realization made me sick to my stomach every single night. Except it wasn't the same, I kept telling myself. My mother had abandoned me out of shame and pride and this rigid religious morality that valued reputation over love. I was doing this out of self-preservation, out of dignity, out of the bone-deep need to show Marcus that words have consequences and mothers are not burdens to be tolerated. Jennifer would benefit from my life's work, yes, but more importantly, Marcus would learn the value of what he'd casually dismissed. He'd learn that the hands that built empires are the same hands that can dismantle legacies. He'd learn that love without respect is just manipulation dressed up in family obligation. At least that's what I told myself at 3 a.m. when sleep wouldn't come and doubt crept in through the darkness. Marcus called me the Tuesday before the party asking if I wanted to grab lunch at this new poke bowl place downtown called Pacific Catch. I almost said no, almost invented some meeting or appointment, but I realized I needed to see him one more time before everything changed. We met at noon in the restaurant's modern industrial space with its exposed brick and hanging Edison bulbs. He ordered the spicy tuna bowl with extra avocado, and I got the salmon with seaweed salad, and we sat at a high-top table near the window overlooking traffic on Burnside Street. He talked about work, about some new project his marketing firm had landed with a tech startup in Beaverton. He talked about the honeymoon he and Jennifer were planning to Costa Rica, about how they'd found this eco-resort in Manuel Antonio that offered ziplining through the rainforest canopy. He was animated and happy, gesturing with his chopsticks, completely oblivious to the fact that I was studying his face like I might never see it again. At some point during his monologue about Costa Rican coffee plantations, I realized I was looking at a stranger. This man across from me with his expensive haircut and his designer sunglasses hooked on his collar and his easy confidence, this wasn't the baby I'd rocked at 4 a.m. while tears streamed down my face from exhaustion. This wasn't the toddler who'd clung to my leg on his first day of preschool at Little Acorns Learning Center. This wasn't even the teenager who'd cried in my arms when his first girlfriend broke his heart. Those versions of Marcus had needed me, had loved me without calculation or condition. This version saw me as an obligation, a burden, something to manage and maintain appropriate distance from. When had that shift happened? Had it been gradual? Years of small moments I'd missed while building businesses and trying to give him everything? Or had it been sudden, some switch that flipped in his 20s when he decided he'd outgrown the woman who'd raised him? I didn't know. And sitting there watching him eat his poke bowl, I realized I'd probably never know. He asked me how I was doing, and I gave him the answer he wanted. Fine, busy with the restaurants, excited about the wedding. He nodded, satisfied, and returned to talking about himself. The lunch lasted 45 minutes. We hugged goodbye on the sidewalk, and he said, "Love you, Mom," in that reflexive way people say bless you after a sneeze. I watched him walk away toward his car, his stride confident and sure, and I thought, enjoy these next few days. They're the last ones where you'll have that certainty. Then I drove to Patricia's office to pick up the final leather portfolio that would change everything. The night before the engagement party, I couldn't eat. I'd made myself a caprese salad with tomatoes from the farmer's market and fresh mozzarella from that Italian deli on Hawthorne, but it sat on my kitchen counter untouched while I paced my living room. The leather portfolio sat on my coffee table, its presence somehow both heavy and insignificant. Inside were documents that represented 26 years of work, sacrifice, vision, and relentless determination. Inside were the deeds to 4 restaurant locations, ownership papers for Hearthstone events, titles to 3 commercial properties in Portland and 1 in Seattle, statements for investment accounts that had grown from nothing into substantial wealth. Inside was everything I'd built from that first food truck, everything I'd promised my infant son while he slept against my chest. And I was giving it all to a woman I'd known for less than 2 years, instead of the man I'd carried for 9 months and raised for 25 years. The doubt hit me hard that night, harder than it had at any point in the previous weeks. I picked up my phone a dozen times to call Patricia and tell her I'd changed my mind, that I wanted to undo everything, that I'd been acting out of hurt and pride and I needed to reverse course before it was too late. But each time I started to dial, I heard Marcus's voice in my head. She's becoming a burden. I can't wait until after the wedding when we can establish some boundaries. That laugh, that casual dismissal of everything I'd ever meant to him. I'd set the phone down, pick up the portfolio, and remind myself why I was doing this. Not out of cruelty, not out of revenge, not really, out of necessity. Out of the deep understanding that sometimes the greatest gift you can give someone is the natural consequence of their choices. I finally fell asleep around 4 in the morning, still dressed, on top of my bed covers. I dreamed about the food truck, about Marcus as a baby strapped to my chest, about the smell of coffee and morning air and possibility. In the dream, I was young again, exhausted again, hopeful again. I was serving breakfast burritos to construction workers who called me sweetheart and tipped in crumpled dollar bills. Marcus was cooing against my heartbeat, his tiny hand wrapped around my finger. I was telling him about the future, about the restaurant I'd open someday, about the life I'd build for us. In the dream, he looked up at me with those dark eyes and said, "You're not a burden, Mama. You're everything." I woke up with tears on my face and sunlight streaming through my bedroom window. It was Saturday morning. It was time. I spent 2 hours getting ready, longer than I'd spent on my appearance in years. I showered, dried my hair until it fell in smooth, dark waves past my shoulders, applied makeup with careful precision. I chose a dress I'd bought months ago for the engagement party, a deep burgundy wrap dress that Jennifer had helped me pick out during a shopping trip to Nordstrom. She'd said it made me look powerful and beautiful, had insisted I buy it even though I'd worried it was too expensive, too young for me. Looking at myself in the mirror now, I understood why she'd pushed for it. I looked good, more than good. I looked like a woman who knew exactly who she was and what she was worth. I put on the diamond earrings I'd bought myself when Ember & Oak turned its first profit, slipped on black heels, and picked up the leather portfolio. My hands were steady. My reflection was calm. Inside, my heart was hammering like it might break through my ribs, but no one would see that. No one would know. The drive to Riverbend Vineyard took exactly 42 minutes. I spent them in silence again. No radio, just the sound of my breathing and tires on asphalt, and the occasional gust of October wind against my car. The vineyard appeared around a curve in the road, its main building a converted barn with string lights already glowing in the afternoon light. Cars filled the gravel parking lot, expensive SUVs and sedans that reflected the kind of crowd Marcus and Jennifer had become part of. Young professionals, college friends, work colleagues, people with master's degrees and stock options and vacation homes. I parked near the back and sat in my car for 5 minutes, portfolio on my lap, watching guests arrive in clusters of laughter and conversation. Jennifer's mother stood near the entrance greeting people, her arms full of sunflowers and dahlias. She waved at me when she spotted my car, her smile warm and genuine. I waved back, took one final deep breath, and stepped out into my future. If this story is touching your heart, please hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you don't miss what happens next. Comment below with, "This is a masterpiece about self-worth," and let me know your thoughts. Your support keeps these stories coming. Inside, the barn had been transformed into something magical. More string lights crisscrossed the exposed beam ceiling, casting warm golden light over round tables covered in white linens. A bar stood in one corner, serving wine from the vineyard's own label. A string quartet played softly near the far wall, something classical I didn't recognize. Guests mingled everywhere, holding glasses of wine and small plates of appetizers that servers circulated through the crowd. I spotted Marcus immediately, standing near the center of the room with Jennifer, both of them glowing with happiness. She wore a soft pink dress that made her look like spring itself, her blonde hair swept up in a loose bun. He had his arm around her waist, was saying something that made her laugh, that real, genuine laugh I'd grown to love. For a moment, just a brief flickering moment, I almost turned around and left. Almost got back in my car and drove home and burned the portfolio and pretended none of this had ever happened. But then Marcus saw me. His face lit up with that smile he'd been giving me his whole life, the one that used to make me feel like the most important person in the world. He waved me over, calling Mom across the crowd, and several heads turned to look at me. I walked toward them, the portfolio tucked under my arm like a purse, my heels clicking on the barn's hardwood floor. Jennifer hugged me first, told me I looked stunning, asked if I'd tried the mushroom crostini yet because they were incredible. Marcus hugged me next, kissed my cheek, said I'm so glad you're here. His cologne was the same one I'd bought him for Christmas 2 years ago. His hug felt exactly like it always had. Nothing had changed for him. Everything had changed for me. The party continued around us in waves of conversation and laughter and clinking glasses. I made small talk with Jennifer's parents, with Marcus's college roommate who I'd fed countless dinners to during his university years, with his co-workers from the marketing firm. Everyone kept mentioning how beautiful the venue was, how perfect Marcus and Jennifer were together, how exciting this new chapter would be. I smiled and agreed and sipped wine I couldn't taste. The whole time, I was aware of the portfolio under my arm, its weight both literal and metaphorical. Patricia had suggested I wait until later in the evening, maybe pull Marcus and Jennifer aside privately, but I knew that wouldn't work. This needed to be public. This needed to be witnessed. Not because I wanted to humiliate him, but because I wanted accountability. I wanted everyone who knew our family to understand that this wasn't some impulsive emotional decision. This was calculated. This was justice. Around 6 o'clock, as the sun started its descent toward the coast range and painted the vineyard in gold and amber light, Jennifer's father clinked his glass to give a toast. The room quieted, guests turning toward where he stood near the fireplace. He gave a beautiful speech about love and partnership, and how proud he was to welcome Marcus into their family. Jennifer's mother went next, crying happy tears as she talked about watching her daughter find someone who cherished her. Then Marcus stood up, holding Jennifer's hand, and thanked everyone for coming, for celebrating with them, for being part of their journey. He mentioned me specifically, said my mom taught me everything about hard work and dedication, and building something meaningful, and I'm grateful every day for her example. The room applauded. People looked at me with warm smiles. I felt my throat close up, felt tears threatening behind my eyes, felt the portfolio under my arm burning like it might catch fire. I stood up. I didn't plan to, hadn't decided this was the moment, but my body moved before my brain could stop it. The room's attention shifted to me, curious and expectant. Marcus looked surprised but pleased, probably assuming I was going to give some touching maternal speech about how proud I was. Jennifer smiled at me with such genuine affection it made my heart crack. I walked to the front of the room, my heels loud in the sudden silence, and stood next to Marcus and Jennifer. I could feel every eye on me, could hear the string quartet trailing off mid-measure, could sense the shift in energy as people realized something unexpected was happening. I looked at Marcus, really looked at him, memorizing his face in this moment before everything shattered. Then I looked at Jennifer, at this sweet woman who'd never done anything but treat me with kindness and respect. I pulled the leather portfolio out from under my arm and held it in both hands. I said, and my voice came out stronger than I expected, steadier, I want to give the happy couple an engagement gift, something meaningful, something that represents the values I've tried to instill in my son his entire life. The room seemed to hold its collective breath. Marcus looked pleased, maybe thinking I was about to announce I'd paid off their honeymoon or bought them a house or something equally generous. I opened the portfolio and pulled out the documents Patricia had prepared, the ones with Jennifer's name typed across the top in official legal text. I said, "These papers represent everything I own. Every business, every property, every investment account, every asset I've acquired over the past 26 years. I held them out toward Jennifer, watched her face transform from confusion to shock as she realized what I was offering. I said, "It's all yours now, Jennifer. Everything. All of it." The silence that followed was absolute. No one moved. No one breathed. Jennifer stared at the papers in my hands like they might bite her. Marcus's face went through several expressions in rapid succession. Confusion to disbelief to the dawning horror of understanding. I kept my hand extended, the document steady, my eyes on Jennifer's face. She whispered, "I don't understand." Her voice cracked on the last word. I said, louder now so everyone could hear, "You're going to do beautiful things with this. Your foundation for single mothers, all those dreams you told me about. You have the resources now. Build something that matters. Help women who need what I needed 26 years ago when I was alone with a baby and nothing but determination." Marcus found his voice. "Mom, what are you doing?" He reached for the papers, but I pulled them back, kept them extended toward Jennifer. I looked at him then, really looked at him, and I saw him see me seeing him. He knew. In that moment, he knew that I'd heard what he said in his apartment, that this wasn't about generosity or engagement gifts or maternal love. This was about consequences. This was about learning that the people you call burdens are the same people who carry your entire world on their shoulders. I said, "You told Jennifer you needed distance from me after the wedding. You said I was suffocating. You called me a burden." My voice didn't waver. The room gasped collectively, a sharp intake of breath from 50 people witnessing a family implode. Marcus's face drained of all color, his skin going from healthy tan to an ashen gray that reminded me of how he'd looked when he had pneumonia at age 7. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out, just this silent opening and closing like a fish pulled from water. Jennifer's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes filling with tears as she looked between Marcus and me, trying to piece together what had just detonated in the middle of her engagement party. The room remained frozen in that horrible tableau, 50 people witnessing something far too intimate and painful for public consumption. Someone's wine glass clinked against a table, the sound obscenely loud in the silence. The string quartet had stopped playing entirely, their instruments hanging useless in their hands as they watched the drama unfold. Jennifer was the first to move. She reached out slowly and took the documents from my hands, her fingers trembling as they closed around the leather portfolio. She looked down at the papers, her eyes scanning the legal text, the official seals, her name repeated over and over in black ink. I watched her process it, watched understanding dawn across her features like sunrise breaking over the Cascades. She whispered, her voice barely audible, "This can't be real. This is everything you've worked for." I said, keeping my tone gentle because none of this was her fault, "It is real, and it's legally binding as of last Tuesday. You are now the sole owner of Ember and Oak and its 3 sister locations, Hearthstone Events, the commercial properties on Morrison Street and in the Pearl District and Seattle, and the beneficiary of all associated investment accounts and retirement funds. Everything that was mine is now yours." Marcus finally found his voice, and when he spoke, it came out harsh and desperate. "Mom, stop this. Whatever you think you heard, you're wrong. We can talk about this privately. Not here, not like this." He reached for the documents in Jennifer's hands, but she pulled them back instinctively, clutching them to her chest. I stepped between them, my body a barrier, and I looked at my son with eyes that I knew were hard and cold, and nothing like the mother he'd known his entire life. I said, "I heard exactly what you said, Marcus. I was standing in your entryway with a container of your favorite chili, the one I'd stayed up late making because you mentioned being stressed. I heard you call me a burden. I heard you tell Jennifer you couldn't wait until after the wedding to establish boundaries and get distance from me. I heard you laugh about it, like my love was something amusing and suffocating instead of the foundation your entire life was built on." The room erupted in whispers, guests turning to each other with shocked expressions and urgent murmured conversations. Jennifer's mother had gone pale, her hand gripping her husband's arm so tightly her knuckles showed white. Marcus's college friends stood in a cluster near the bar, their faces reflecting varying degrees of horror and fascination. I saw Jennifer's father start to move toward us, perhaps to intervene or diffuse the situation, but his wife held him back with a subtle shake of her head. This wasn't their fight. This was between a mother and son. between love and betrayal, between sacrifice and entitlement. Marcus said, his voice rising now with panic and anger, "So that's it? You're going to punish me for one conversation, for words I didn't even mean, by giving away everything to someone you barely know? That's insane, Mom. That's not rational." I felt something crack open inside my chest, some final restraint breaking loose. I said, and my voice was louder now too, matching his volume, "You're right. I barely know Jennifer. I've known her less than 2 years. But in that time, she has shown me more respect and genuine affection than you have in the past 5 years. She asks about my day and actually listens to the answers. She remembers the small things I mention in passing. She thanks me for things you take for granted. She sees me as a person, Marcus, not just as a resource to be managed or a burden to be tolerated." The room had gone silent again, everyone straining to hear every word of this devastation playing out in real time. I continued, "Do you know what it's like to hear your child, the person you sacrificed everything for, call you a burden? Do you have any concept of how that feels?" Jennifer was crying openly now, tears streaming down her face and ruining her carefully applied makeup. She said, "Marcus, is that true? Did you really say that about your mother?" He turned to her, his face a mixture of guilt and defensiveness and fear. He said, "It wasn't like that, Jen. She's taking it out of context." I was stressed and venting, and I didn't mean it the way it sounded. But Jennifer was shaking her head, backing away from him, the portfolio still clutched against her chest. She said, "Context doesn't change words like that, Marcus. Your mother has done nothing but support us, love us, help us with everything. How could you say something so cruel about her? And to me, like I would agree with you?" I watched something shift in her face, some fundamental reassessment of the man she'd agreed to marry. I hadn't anticipated that. I'd thought she might refuse the inheritance, might side with Marcus out of love and loyalty. But she was looking at him now like she was seeing a stranger. Marcus's panic escalated into desperation. He turned back to me, his voice breaking. "Mom, please. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I didn't mean it. I love you. You know I love you. We can fix this. Just take back the papers and we'll talk about this. Really talk, and I'll prove to you that you matter to me." The tears in his eyes looked genuine, his anguish real, and for a moment I wavered. This was my son. This was the baby I'd carried, the child I'd raised, the young man I'd been so proud of. Every maternal instinct screamed at me to forgive him, to take back the documents, to pretend none of this had happened. But then I remembered the laugh, that casual, dismissive laugh when he'd talked about needing distance from me. That hadn't been stress talking. That had been truth. I said quietly now because I didn't need volume anymore. "I taught you that actions have consequences. I taught you that words matter, that how you treat people matters, that respect isn't optional even within families. Apparently, I failed to make those lessons stick. So this is the final lesson, Marcus. The one you'll remember for the rest of your life. The people you dismiss as burdens are often the people holding up your entire world. And when they step away, when they remove their support, you learn very quickly what you actually built on your own versus what was built for you." I turned to Jennifer then, my voice softening. "You didn't ask for this, and I'm sorry for putting you in this position. But I mean what I said. This is yours now. Use it to help other women, to build something meaningful, to create the kind of legacy that actually matters. You don't owe Marcus anything, and you don't owe me anything either. This is a gift with no strings attached." Jennifer looked down at the documents again, then back at me. She said, her voice thick with tears, "I can't accept this. It's too much. It's your life's work." I shook my head. My life's work was raising my son. These businesses, this wealth, they were just tools I used to provide for him. And he's made it clear he doesn't value the sacrifice behind them. So they go to someone who will appreciate what they represent. She opened her mouth to argue again, but I held up my hand. "The papers are signed, Jennifer. The transfers are complete. This isn't a negotiation or a discussion. It's done. Patricia Montgomery at Cascade Legal Group has all the details if you need guidance on managing everything." I gave her my lawyer's business card, which I'd tucked into the portfolio for exactly this purpose. The weight of what I'd just done settled over the room like fog rolling in from the Columbia River. Guests who'd come to celebrate an engagement were now witnesses to something far darker and more complicated. Marcus stood frozen, his face cycling through emotions too quickly to track. Anger, grief, disbelief, shame. He looked young suddenly, younger than his 25 years. like the child who'd needed me to fix everything. But I couldn't fix this. I wouldn't fix this. This was his consequence to carry. Jennifer's father finally stepped forward, his voice careful and measured. Perhaps we should all take a breath and discuss this somewhere private. This is clearly a family matter that doesn't need an audience. I appreciated his attempt at diplomacy, but it was too late for privacy. This had to be public. This had to be witnessed. Otherwise, Marcus would spin it into some story where I was the irrational one, the emotional woman making rash decisions. This way, everyone knew the truth. If you're feeling the weight of this moment, show your support by liking this video, subscribing to the channel, and hitting that notification bell for more powerful stories. Leave a comment saying, "A breathtaking tale of dignity and consequences," to share your thoughts. Thank you for being here. I said to Jennifer's father, with all due respect, "There's nothing left to discuss. The legal documents are executed. My decision is final. I came here to deliver an engagement gift, and I've done that. Now I'm going to leave and let you all continue your celebration." I picked up my purse from the table where I'd set it, checked that I had my car keys, and turned toward the exit. Marcus grabbed my arm, his grip tight enough to hurt. "Mom, you can't just leave. You can't do this and walk away. We need to talk about this." His eyes were wild now, the reality of what he'd lost starting to penetrate through the shock. I looked down at his hand on my arm, then up at his face. I said, very quietly, so only he could hear, "Let go of me, Marcus." He hesitated, his fingers tightening for just a second before releasing. The mark of his grip remained on my skin, red and accusing. I walked toward the barn's entrance, my heels clicking on the hardwood floor in a rhythm that sounded like a countdown. 10 steps. 9. 8. Behind me, I heard Jennifer say something to Marcus, her voice sharp with what might have been anger or might have been fear. I heard his response, desperate and pleading. I heard other voices joining in. Jennifer's parents trying to restore order, guests murmuring their shock and speculation. 7 steps. 6. 5. I passed the table with the guest book where people had signed their names and written congratulations to the happy couple. I passed the welcome sign with Marcus, and Jennifer's names intertwined in calligraphy. 4 steps. 3. 2. I reached the door and pushed it open, stepping out into the October evening where the air smelled like earth and grapes and coming rain. Marcus followed me outside. Of course he did. I'd known he would. He called my name across the gravel parking lot, his voice echoing off the converted barn and the surrounding hills. I kept walking toward my car, my pace steady and unhurried. He caught up to me as I reached for my door handle, positioned himself between me and escape. "Mom, please, just listen to me for 5 minutes. 5 minutes, and then if you still want to leave, I won't stop you." I looked at him in the fading light, this man I'd created and raised and loved more than my own life. I said, "I've listened to you for 25 years, Marcus. I've listened to your dreams and fears and complaints and triumphs. I've listened to you talk about your day, your girlfriend, your job, your plans. I've listened so intently that I forgot to pay attention to whether you were listening back. So no, I'm done listening. It's time for you to hear me." I took a breath, steadied myself against my car. The metal was cool under my palm, grounding me in the physical world while my emotional world spun out of control. I said, "When I was 17 years old, I got pregnant with you. My parents threw me out of the house. Your father disappeared before your first ultrasound. I was completely alone, working 2 jobs while trying to finish high school online, living in a studio apartment that cost more than I could afford. I was terrified every single day. But you know what kept me going? You. The idea of you. The promise that I could give you a better life than the one I had. So I worked. I built a food truck business from nothing. I saved every penny. I learned about entrepreneurship and management and marketing through trial and error and sheer stubborn determination. I opened my first restaurant when you were 10 years old. Do you remember that day?" He nodded, tears streaming down his face now. "I remember. You let me cut the ribbon at the grand opening." I said, "That's right. And do you remember what I told you when we were standing there with those oversized scissors?" He shook his head. I said, "I told you that everything I built was for you, that someday this would all be yours, that you'd never have to struggle the way I did, that you'd have opportunities I could only dream about. And I meant it, Marcus. Every word. I spent 25 years building an empire with the sole purpose of handing it to you. But somewhere along the way, you stopped seeing me as a person who loved you and started seeing me as a bank account that existed for your convenience. You stopped valuing the sacrifice and started resenting the presence." He tried to interrupt, but I held up my hand. I wasn't finished. I said, You want to know the worst part? It's not even the burden comment, although that hurt more than anything I've experienced in my entire life. The worst part is that you said it to Jennifer, someone you supposedly love and trust, like it was just a casual observation. Like calling your mother a burden was such an accepted truth that it didn't even require justification. That tells me this wasn't a one-time thought born from stress. This is how you actually feel about me. And I can't unknow that, Marcus. I can't unhear it. I can't pretend it didn't happen just because you're sorry you got caught. The wind picked up, carrying the smell of rain and rustling through the grapevines that surrounded the parking lot. Marcus wiped his face with the back of his hand, his expensive button-down shirt untucked and wrinkled from the evening's chaos. He said, his voice hoarse, "What do I have to do to fix this? Tell me what you need and I'll do it. Therapy, family counseling, whatever it takes. I'll prove to you that you matter to me." I felt my resolve waver again, felt that maternal instinct to comfort and forgive and make everything okay. But I couldn't. Not this time. I said, "You can't fix this, Marcus. Some things, once broken, can't be repaired. They can only be learned from. Maybe in a few years, after you've had time to understand what you lost and why you lost it, we can have a different conversation. But right now, I need you to let me go. I need you to step away from my car and let me leave with whatever dignity I have left." He stared at me for a long moment, and I watched the realization settle over him that this was really happening, that his mother was really walking away, that his inheritance was really gone. He said, almost childlike in his desperation, "I love you, Mom. I know you don't believe me right now, but I do," I said, and my voice finally cracked with the emotion I'd been holding back all evening. "I know you love me, Marcus. I've never doubted that. But love without respect is just another form of control. And I won't be controlled anymore, not even by my own son. Now please move away from my car." He stepped aside slowly, his movements mechanical like a robot whose programming had glitched. I opened my door, slid into the driver's seat, and started the engine. Through the windshield, I could see him standing there in the gravel parking lot, his shoulders shaking with sobs, his carefully constructed life falling apart in real time. I put the car in reverse, backed out of my parking space, and drove away from Riverbend Vineyard without looking back. The drive home took 42 minutes, the same amount of time as the drive there, but it felt like crossing into a different universe. The woman who'd driven to that engagement party had been a mother first and a person second. The woman driving home was something new, something I didn't have a name for yet. Free, maybe. Devastated, certainly. But also, powerful in a way I'd never felt before. I'd reclaimed my story. I'd chosen myself over the role I'd been playing for 25 years. The cost was everything, but the cost of staying had been even higher. When I got home, I poured myself a glass of the Oregon Pinot Noir I kept for special occasions, and sat on my back porch watching the city lights flicker to life as darkness settled over Portland. My phone buzzed constantly with calls and texts from Marcus, from Jennifer, from numbers I didn't recognize that must have been party guests wanting gossip or clarification. I ignored them all. Tomorrow I'd deal with the aftermath. Tomorrow I'd face whatever consequences came from publicly dismantling my relationship with my son. Tomorrow I'd figure out who I was in this new life I'd chosen. But tonight I just sat in the October air and felt the weight of 25 years of burden lifting off my shoulders. Marcus had called me a burden, but the truth was he'd been mine. The beautiful, exhausting, all-consuming burden I'd carried with pride and love and total devotion. And now I'd set him down, and both of us would have to figure out how to walk forward from here. 3 months have passed since that October evening at Riverbend Vineyard. Jennifer and Marcus postponed their wedding indefinitely. She and I meet for coffee every other week at a place called Morning Ritual near her apartment. She started the foundation we talked about, using my former resources to help single mothers access childcare and job training. Last month, she helped 15 women find stable employment and housing. Marcus and I haven't spoken since that night, though Jennifer tells me he asks about me constantly. She says he's in therapy, that he's trying to understand how things went so wrong. I hope that's true. I hope he learns the lessons I couldn't teach him any other way. As for me, I started a consulting business helping other women entrepreneurs build sustainable businesses. I work less, sleep better, and wake up each morning knowing that my worth isn't tied to how much I give away or how much I'm needed. I chose freedom over familiarity, and some days that choice feels like the bravest thing I've ever done. Marcus called me a burden, and in doing so, he freed me from carrying his weight. Sometimes the greatest revenge is simply learning to put yourself first.